Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for the 8th Annual National Call of Unity, Why I'm an Advocate. I'm Arlene Vassell, Vice President of Programs, Prevention, and Social Change with the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. I am humbled and honored to share this space and time with you all today as we all step away from our busy schedules to remember and mourn the lives lost to domestic violence, sexual assault, and other forms of gender-based violence, and celebrate those that have survived these senseless acts of inhumanity. We also come together to reflect on the power of advocacy to create social transformation. We honor the courage and legacy of advocates who toiled before us and connect with each other in ways to remain strong, inspired, and motivated to move our social justice efforts forward. Thank you all for the tremendous work that you do every day on behalf of survivors and their loved ones. And thank you for being with us as we begin National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Hashtag DVAM 2017. This year, we also join our friends at the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and colleagues throughout the nation in honoring the 30th anniversary of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Another hashtag. Hashtag DVAM turns 30. Domestic Violence Awareness Month was launched nationwide in October 1987 and evolved from the Day of Unity held in October 1981 and conceived by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The Day of Unity soon became an entire week devoted to a range of activities conducted at the local, state, and national level. To honor the tradition of the National Day of Unity, the National Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisory Group began organizing the National Call of Unity in 2010. On this call, you will hear from an amazing and diverse group of individuals, including survivors, advocates, community leaders, national organizations, and government officials that share the same passion and goal of strengthening and transforming efforts to end domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. Together we can, together we will, no more excuses. Now, with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mary Louise Kelly. She serves as the Director of the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program, which administers the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, the primary federal funding stream dedicated to the support of emergency shelter and related assistance for victims of domestic violence and their children. Mary Louise?
Thank you, Arlene. And thank you to all of the many and diverse organizations who partnered to make this Call of Unity a really unified effort. I think it's wonderful the way we have national organizations like the National Resource Center, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence with its long history of lifting up DVAM, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, the Hotline, Women of Color Network, and the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence. We're joined by culturally specific organizations like Casa de Esperanza and Ujima, organizations that care about survivors when they are young and when they're in later life. We're joined by faith-based organizations, the Faith Trust Institute, Focus, people and organizations that inspire us, like Heal a Woman to Heal a Nation, organizations that make sure that the work on the ground is accomplished every day, like the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance and the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services, and states and coalitions everywhere. And with partners from organizations that span domestic violence and sexual assault, like No More and Rape and Domestic Violence Information Center. As demonstrated by this lineup of partnering organizations, we all come to our work as advocates for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence with different tools in our toolbox to make a difference in the lives of survivors. As a federal partner, I work alongside my colleagues at CDC and Office of Women's Health and the Health Resources and Services Administration, with partners at the Department of Justice and across government. And we feds hope to bring to the table resources, a national view, research, and policy solutions to the stubborn problems before us. But only by working in partnership with the brain trust of advocates in these organizations and in programs around the country can federal resources make a difference in the lives of survivors. At this time, when no less than 17 U.S. states and territories are recovering from the impact of natural disasters and mass violence, from hurricanes, flooding, wildfires, and shootings, and millions of people in Puerto Rico continue to lack the basic necessities of water, food, and shelter. We all struggle to grasp what can we do and how to do more. Because when survivors come to us in the midst of these crises, we have to consider, what does it mean to be safe in our homes? While those of us who work in the domestic violence field often think first of safety from violence and coercion, we know that when families are faced with survival decisions, safety also includes, where will I put my children to sleep tonight? How will I refill my blood pressure medication? And is it safe to call for help? Safety is such a multifaceted concept that affects all of the social determinants of our health and well-being. And for victims of domestic violence, disaster and disruption only increase the dangers in their daily lives. So when survivors come forward for help, they want the violence to stop. But they also need someone who can talk with them about their options, who listens to their wisdom about their lived experience, who understands how their experiences of race, class, faith, age, gender identity intersect and can enrich their lives but complicate their choices. They need someone who understands that finding a place to live may be more important than dealing with the violence today. They need an advocate. Never forget that what you do every day is rare and remarkable. So today, we're here to celebrate the advocates who work in shelters, in courtrooms, in houses of worship, and homes. We celebrate advocates on the hotlines and in the schools. We celebrate the advocates in healthcare, in government, in disaster zones, and in national organizations and local programs. All of you, with your commitment to being fully there for all survivors, are the reason that this isn't a job, it's a movement. So last night I added my Facebook I Am an Advocate banner. And why am I an advocate? I'm an advocate because from the first time I picked up a crisis call in a domestic violence shelter and rape crisis center in Manhattan, Kansas, I couldn't be anything else. That program saved my life and the lives of so many others. This is my life's work. I know that many of you feel the same way. I'm just so grateful that we are in it together.
Thank you so much, Mayor Louise. Thank you. Now, I'd like to introduce Mothyna James-Brightful. She is the co-founder and director of operations for Heal a Woman to Heal a Nation. She is a professional speaker for over 12 years. She also has worked in the field of sexual violence prevention for the last 11 years. Sister Mothyna has honored speaking engagements and requests at numerous conferences, community programs, and schools. Sister Mothyna?
Thank you, Arlene, and thank you, everyone who's here. And thank you all, and celebrate yourself. If I had a clapper, I would shake it for you because you are doing a work that's so powerful and necessary. My first brush with being an advocate began when I was but 19 years old at the illustrious Morgan State University. And can I tell you how many of you remember at 19 that you knew nothing but thought you knew everything? And so I had a group of 60 young people who I was responsible for, and we would split them 30 by 30. And I had one particular counselor who was so passionate, but didn't quite do everything the way we wanted it to. And one day we had all the young women divided in a separate group, and I came in and she had a book of STIs, STDs as we used to call it back in the day. And she had the book opened up, and she was walking around, and she thought she was doing something amazing because she kept showing the book into the faces of each of the young students. And these were 8th and 7th graders, and she thought that she could do pregnancy prevention by just showing them STDs and scare them into not agreeing. So she basically scared the mess out of one of my young girls. I watched her in the back of the classroom that day. You're talking about a lecture hall filled with young students. And she sat in the classroom, and I watched her eyes begin to well with water. And as I came in and had my left hand out tapping the shoulder of my counselor, like, what are you doing? Stop. Get back to the curriculum. And I watched her run down the stairs and towards the door. I went after her. And this was my first brush with having to be a voice for someone. Because as she ran into the bathroom, and I ran in after her, she closed the stall door. And I still remember standing there in my sneakers. They were pink FUBU sneakers. And staring at a gray metal door and hearing her cry on the other side. And I remember what it felt like, the hardness of the door, to pound on it and ask her to let me in. Are you okay? What's wrong? And as her friend came in that day and said, Miss Mothyna, and she grabbed on my elbow of my right hand, I said, do you know what's wrong? She said, no. And slowly but surely, the stall door began to open that day. And she came out, and although I'm only 5'2", and she was taller than me, somehow she really and truly shows up as a young person in pain and rested her head on my shoulder, and I could feel the tears wet my shirt. And I wrapped my arms around her, and I just held her in that moment. And we stood there, and her friend rubbed her back, and I said, what's wrong? She looked me in my face, and she was an artist. She loved art. She loved every medium of art. And she looked at me and she said, I think I have herpes. And I couldn't fathom why would you say that? What would you think about that? What happened? And in that moment, it was the first time someone ever told me that an adult had hurt them, because she said her mother's boyfriend had molested her. That was my first brush with advocacy. And I share that story because it began me on a path at 19 to join you right now today in 2017. And so many of us have similar stories. So many of us can share stories upon stories and scenario and experience similar to that one. But here's 3 things I want to remind you of today. Because as you heard already, you are an amazing individual. Your humanity is powerful, and you change the world every single day. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is whatever you feel the need to give to other people, give it to yourself first. The compassion, the camaraderie, the advocacy that you give to other people, give it to yourself first, because we need you. I need you as a fellow advocate to be in your joy as much as possible in the world we live in today that is so difficult to do. And the work we do is difficult, but it's so necessary. The second thing I'm going to ask you to do is chase the sun. What do I mean by that? I want you to find your joy and revel in it. One of my favorite places to be is the beach. I was born in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, and so I have family that's still there to this day. 1 year ago today, I was sitting on the beach in St. Croix, talking to other advocates, walking in and around those islands, and today, my family, in fact, many of those listening right now, is affected by what's happened. But you've got to chase the sun. So find the things that give you joy, that make you celebrate the beauty of our humanity, so it outshines all of the tragedy that we know still exists. Now, the third thing I'm going to share with you is why I am an advocate. And that is because that same artist, that same 8th grade girl, showed up for me nearly 8 years later on the same campus, and she still remembered me, and she wrapped me in a hug, and she looked at me, and she smiled. And I said, what are you doing here? She goes, I go to school here now. And we didn't talk about that day in the bathroom. All we did was celebrate the joy that she's still here. She's still an artist. She's still a dancer. She's still vibrant. She's still beautiful. And so many of the other examples of survivors that exist today. Because even though, like many of us on this line, I may not have known exactly what I was doing, I knew enough to just show up in the humanity and compassion and the love that was necessary. And you do that every day. So the third thing I want to remind you to do is when you feel like quitting, remember why you started. It's the one thing I know I do every time I get frustrated when someone gets out of jail or never goes to jail or hurts another individual because they feel they're entitled to do it, when I feel like quitting, I remember why I started. That's what I'm encouraging you to do today. So those three things again. Whatever you feel the need to give to other people, give to yourself first. Chase the sun. And remember why you started. I want to thank Arlene and the team and the amazing individuals who invited all of us to be present together today. And I want to continue to share the world with you because, as it was already said, this is definitely my life's work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mothyna. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. And you gave me a lot to reflect on as well, and the great reminder of bringing my joy to my work every day. Thank you. So now we will hear from our next speaker, Ruth Glenn. She is the Executive Director of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Ruth has worked and volunteered in the domestic violence field for over 20 years. As a survivor, Ruth also often shares her experience to bring awareness about the dynamics of domestic violence. Ruth Glenn.
Thank you so much, Arlene, and thank you all for being on the call, and especially thanks to NRCDV and all of you for the work that you do for survivors of domestic violence. I'm very, very pleased to be here and share my story and let you know why I'm an advocate. 30 years ago, I was shot and left for dead by my then husband. After many years of abuse and control and all of the things that victims and survivors of domestic violence go through, I had a wonderful person step into my life who also happened to be my boss at that time. She was the first one to plant the seed that there was hope and something was happening to me that I could possibly change, but that I also had support to make that change. She stepped forward one day and said, I know what's happening for you. I feel bad for you. And I believe that things can get better for you. She gave me a lot of encouragement and a lot of hope about what life could be like after domestic violence. I must confess that it took many years to understand what was happening to me and make that change. And when I did, it was very, very scary. The threat of guns and the threat of violence against my child and my family were real. And for victims and survivors, they know that. They understand better than anyone what that means and the fear that it instills. But I did decide to leave. I took every precaution I could, but must confess also that the next 8 months were just pretty bad, and that he stalked and harassed, and as I said earlier, finally found me and did the ultimate, which was to harm me. And I'm assuming that I know he thought I was dead at the point that he did what he did, the ultimate act. But I did survive. And just a side note, he did eventually kill himself, which was also very sad. And survivors know that better than anyone. We are not with perpetrators because we want the violence. We're with perpetrators because we care about them. They act in different ways, and they have control over how they act, but it's not our fault that we cared for these people. After that, it was a very difficult journey for a couple of years, and more than that, of course. But I did decide that because of the words that that person spoke to me, there was hope and that we could all do something different, including me, about those that experience domestic violence. And I made a conscious effort in my mind to be a part of a solution, a part of spreading the word about domestic violence. And I felt as though victims and survivors should, that my experience could lend itself to affecting change throughout the society and making things different for children and women especially who experience domestic violence. I was fortunate in that I had a job And I kept that job through all of this and finally eventually went back to school. It was very difficult, I must admit, and I don't pretend that the journey to healing is easy, but it was worth every moment of it. And to be where I am today, which is doing the work that I'm passionate about and that I hope inspires and provides hope to others, particularly those who are experiencing domestic violence, has been a fantastic journey. We can all make a difference, whether we're survivors or not, but I feel especially akin to those who have experienced domestic violence and survived it like I did, that we have a lot to contribute to this work. Sometimes it feels as though we're not making any headway. Sometimes it feels as though we never kind of got through it. But I guarantee you that as we move forward and understand the impact that we have, it gets better. My work now is life-fulfilling. It's hard. I wish it weren't so hard sometimes. I hope that all of us in NRCDV, all of you working in the field, all of you that are doing the day-to-day work for victims and survivors, understand that you can make a difference. I'll never forget that one of my first times in Safe House, I actually ended up in Safe House twice after having left him, that there is so much hurt and pain. But I also understand that if we keep just going and advocate like we're supposed to and can, and stick our heels in and say enough, that we can do it. We don't do it alone. We do it collectively. We do it as survivors, and we do it because we understand that we can make a difference and make a change. It's not always easy. I know I've said that at least twice before, but I think it's important to remember that. But with conviction, passion, hope, understanding, and looking around you and understanding that we can make a difference for those suffering, it gets easier. I am so very grateful for all that I work with and for those that I don't even know who do the groundwork and make sure that victims feel safe, make sure victims have protection orders, make sure that victims have a hand that they can hold as they move through this. Because we must remind them on the other side is a whole different world, and they have a lot to contribute as survivors. With all of that said, I just want to let you know that this is why I advocate. This is why I feel strongly about this issue. I also feel very strongly that we can make a difference. Thank you so much for allowing me this time. And though I've said it a couple of times, I just want to say I appreciate everything that everyone does in this work to end domestic violence. Thank you so much, and thank you, Arlene.
Thank you so much, Ruth Glenn. That was perfect. Thank you for sharing your personal story with us, and thank you for telling us about your journey, your resilience, your healing, and all of that. We really appreciate it today and every day. Now, on behalf of the Faith Institute, Reverend Dr. MacNichol will lead us in a universal prayer and moment of silence for all who have lost their lives to domestic violence and sexual assault. Dr. MacNichol is co-executive director of Connect, a New York City nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing interpersonal violence and promoting gender justice. Dr. MacNichol created and leads Connect Faith, a decade-long interfaith movement in New York City to build the capacity of religious leaders and communities of faith to work to end intimate partner abuse and co-occurring forms of family violence. Reverend Dr. MacNichol.
Sisters and brothers, let us gather our spirits and enter into a moment of silence for all those whose lives have been extinguished by violence. Let us hold their families and communities in our hearts. O Holy One of life and love, source of all that is and will be, we give heartfelt thanks for this precious time together today. We are grateful for the chance to inspire and strengthen one another as we struggle to stay steady and whole in the face of all that stands in the way of justice and love. Be with us now and in the year to come as we work to create a safe, just, and peaceful world. Hear us and help us as we pray for the liberation of healing of all people who are struggling with the fear, confusion, and sorrow of intimate violence and abuse. For all those who have been driven from their homes, who are in prison for defending their own lives, or who are bound to their oppressor because their suffering has been denied by family, friends, and community. Comfort and strengthen those who feel they are alone and have no one to turn to. May they find healing and compassion. Mend their hearts with radical hope and the vision of a brighter day. Hear us and help us as we pray for the advocates everywhere who give so much, who open themselves to the suffering of others, who listen with the ear of their hearts and offer their presence with warmth, sensitivity, and non-judgmental embrace day after day. Refresh our spirits, O Holy One. Help us to be in our joy, to take care of ourselves, and encourage those we work alongside of to do the same. We all know there are days when the stories are too much and the resources are too little, when we are ambushed by grief and our hearts are stretched beyond their limits. On those days, remind us that we are part of an indestructible web of compassion and caring. Renew our minds with the knowledge that our work makes a difference, that we are part of a powerful movement that seeks liberation and healing for all. We especially pray for those survivors and advocates who are in the midst of tragedies and disasters in Puerto Rico and Mexico and U.S. Virgin Islands and Florida, Texas and Nevada and so many other places. Be with them now. May they find safety and support, and may the resources they desperately need be mobilized swiftly. Spirit of all that is sacred, bless our movement and provide us with the fortitude and the wisdom we need for the journey ahead. Illuminate our blind spots. Help us to hear one another, to know that every voice counts, that it is in the embrace of our differences that we will find unity and power. Help us to discard false notions of superiority and privilege and open our eyes to the divinity that dwells within each one of us as we strive to make mutuality, respect, compassion, and nonviolence a reality in the practices and in our practices and policies and in our daily lives. Finally, we ask for an infusion of hope and faith and the sure knowledge that we have everything we need right now to make our communities, our country, and this world a place where our children and our children's children can flourish in safety, justice, and peace. We ask these things in the name of the power that is love. Amen, Amen, Ashe.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. MacNichol. Now let's welcome our next speaker, Rachel Haas, on behalf of No More. Rachel serves as the Managing Director for the No More campaign. Rachel?
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to join the National Call of Unity, both personally and on behalf of No More. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to celebrate the incredible advocates and survivors across the country that give life to this movement and give me so much hope for our future. Now, more than ever, it's so important to have these moments to come together and to renew our commitment to creating a more just and equal society where all people can thrive. And we just want to say how committed we are to advocating and creating a more inclusive and equitable society and to lifting up those voices that face the most barriers to being heard. I'm so inspired and encouraged by the thousands of advocates and survivors, all of you that are working tirelessly to challenge the status quo and make the world safer and more equitable. Thank you. It takes enormous courage and vulnerability and power to do and engage in this hard work. But with every advocate and survivor taking a stand, we are stronger and more powerful. Together we can end domestic violence and sexual assault. Thank you so much for all the hard work you do and for making this movement possible. Arlene?
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you for the work at No More. Our next speaker is Miriam Durrani, Public Policy Attorney at the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Miriam?
Thank you. Great. Thanks, Arlene. Thank you for having me on the call today, and I'm so grateful to everyone who is able to join us and for all the work that you do. A little bit about me. I used to work on behalf of survivors, volunteering on a hotline in college, then as a case manager, and then most recently representing victims of domestic violence secure legal remedies like divorce and protection orders. After arguing a case before a judge who expressed extreme bias towards my Arabic-speaking clients, it fueled my passion to work on a policy level to create systematic change. Now that I don't get to work with my clients directly, I still see the stories of incredible survivors and advocates through the National Network to End Domestic Violence's census. Every day, brave survivors across the country muster the courage to call a complete stranger and ask for help for a devastating and potentially life-threatening situation they are facing. More often than not, that advocate on the other end of the phone patiently listens to them, offers them support, helps them safety plan, or helps them into shelter. But far too often, the advocate has the painful job of turning them away. Every year, NRCDV conducts our domestic violence counts, National Census of Domestic Violence Services, a 24-hour count of programs across the country who share how many individuals were helped on that day. In just one day, it's September last year, nearly 73,000 survivors of domestic violence took refuge in shelter or received non-residential services such as counseling or legal services. On that very same day, survivors made nearly 12,000 requests for services that programs were unable to meet due to lack of resources. This in and of itself is devastating. The advocates at nearly 1,900 programs across the country from the Virgin Islands to Alaska stood to answer these calls. Through the census, advocates share stories of heartbreak. Survivors are turned away from services, have to take multiple buses to get to work 2 jobs to support their children, or are evicted from their homes. But they also share the stories of immense joy, relief, hope, and courage as survivors fight for safety and justice through the legal system, find a safe, affordable home, get their first job after learning how to write a resume, and have their children sleep safely through the night without violence. In my role at NRCDV, I manage the internal census process, and part of what I absolutely love the most are hearing the inspiring quotes from advocates. An advocate in Idaho shared, "A survivor attended her hearing with one of our court advocates and shared that she felt like she finally had the courage to show up to court and tell the judge her story. She was able to confront her abuser, knowing that she had the program support behind her. We gave her the boost of confidence she needed, and we are here to help her every step of the way." The census allows us to see behind the walls and illuminate the incredible, real, life-saving work that domestic violence advocates are doing every day. We know you are overworked, we know it's exhausting, and we know you don't do it for the money, but you still dedicate every day to achieving safety and justice for others. We use the stories and data from the annual report to transform federal policy and secure resources for domestic violence survivors and protections. The commitment of domestic violence advocates who are saving the world little by little every day, and the strength of survivors fuels our passion and is at the center of our work. I am an advocate because it only takes one person to make a difference in the life of someone who's experienced domestic violence. Thank you again for all of the incredible work that you do.
Thank you so much,
Arlene.
Mariam, and thank you so much, Mariam, and thank you for that information about the data that NRCDV collects. Now, up next, I want to introduce Pierre Beristain, Assistant Director of Innovation and Engagement for the National Latino Network. Pierre?
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a moment to recognize that yesterday the world awoke to shocking and horrid news of yet another mass shooting, this time in Las Vegas. And we at Casa de Esperanza are truly at a loss for words to describe the fragility of our feelings. But I do know that in the face of other acts of terror, our communities have demonstrated tremendous resiliency and heroism. And I really hope that this time is no different, because we will certainly need all the strength that we can summon to reconstitute our lives. And it's in times like these that I find courage in a quote from Eduardo Galeano, one of my favorite authors, who says, "Utopia is on the horizon. I move 2 steps towards it, and it moves 2 steps back. I walk another 10 steps, and the horizon runs 10 steps further away. And as much as I walk, I'll never be able to reach it. So what is the point? What is the point of utopia? The point is precisely that, to keep walking." So friends, if you've turned on the news in the last 6 months, you have certainly heard the polarizing nature of our national discourse. As a DACA recipient and survivor, I find myself restless at night, unable to sleep or concentrate. And one can truly be left gasping for the freshness of compassion and solidarity. As advocates, we might ask ourselves, how do we do this? How do we continue to make progress? How do we instill compassion and solidarity in our communities? I find myself asking those questions quite often. And then I remember the quote from Eduardo Galeano. I remember that utopia will keep walking away from us. But as long as we continue to walk towards it, as long as we don't give up in serving survivors, engaging communities, transforming lives, fighting racism and white supremacy, as long as we continue to call on our allies to denounce LGBT phobia and xenophobia, Islamophobia, and all other forms of hatred, as long as we keep our eyes on the horizon, I think we will be okay. We will be better off. It's in these unsettling times that I also get a degree of comfort by looking around, and I look around at the community I am so privileged to work in and for. I look at my colleagues and I think, man, you're not alone. 800,000 undocumented youth are part of your community. The thousands of advocates in 1,500 shelters all over the United States, the policymakers, the lawyers defending our rights, the nurses and doctors conducting medical exams after trauma, the therapists and leaders of faith who lend their ear and wisdom. They have our backs, and they are our community. So we are not alone in this work. And today, let it be a day to remind us of that very fact. And let us not stop saying thanks to the very colleagues who uplift us on a daily basis. So on behalf of Casa de Esperanza, the National Latino Network, I want to thank all of you for the work that you do, for the passion you bring, and the communities you help transform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre. At this point, there's words that we've heard that I want to repeat. Why am I an advocate? We've heard keeping our eyes on the horizon. We've heard passion. We've heard courage. We've heard hope. We've heard love. We've heard joy, solidarity, compassionate. I want to thank our amazing speakers for sharing your personal stories and for your awesome words of inspiration, hope, and encouragement. You are appreciated by many, including me and your friends here at the National Resource Center. As we all remain committed to supporting survivors and raising awareness about the prevalence and impact of domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, let's also enhance our efforts to stop violence and abuse and oppressions from happening in the first place by engaging with our communities in a meaningful way to implement strategies intended to interrupt cultural values, norms, and constructs that support it. Transformation becomes possible when individuals, communities, and institutions have access to both knowledge and tools for action. Hence, NRCDV's message for Domestic Violence Awareness Month 2017, Awareness plus Action equals social change. We believe that prevention is possible. When equipped with a heightened level of awareness and an understanding of the concrete actions necessary to get there, social change can and will happen, but we need all of you. Together, as you've heard, we can make a difference. An important lesson we have learned from many successful social change movements is advocacy matters. Social change doesn't happen by accident. We need advocates like you to use your stories as an inspiration for action. Social change requires collaborative efforts from all of us to find, create, and share tools, practices, and strategies that will help us to collectively achieve the transformation that we desire. Throughout October, NRCDV will host a variety of campaigns and events that will highlight awareness plus action as key approaches for social change. Advocates will also share their personal stories about why they became an advocate and what does it mean and look like to be an advocate for social change. Please check our DVAP website for additional information. Thank you to everyone that joined the call today and to all who may listen at a later date. Again, I sincerely thank you all for all that you do on behalf of all survivors and their loved ones. And I want to say a big thank you to our partnering organizations, many that are part of the Domestic Violence Awareness Project. In closing, as we continue on this journey together with so many tragedies happening around us, near and far, please remember to also take good care of yourselves. The fact is, you can't pour from an empty cup. Audre Lorde, feminist and civil rights activist, said it best. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Pay close attention to your own well-being. Be in your joy, like Mothyna told us. Practice mindfulness. Reach out for support and help as needed. Also remember to provide lots of support and love to your peers and colleagues. One of Dr. King's most compelling vision is that of a beloved community, a community in which people of different backgrounds recognize that we are all interconnected and that our individual well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of others. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a great week.